Right, we're going to talk about metering equipment providers. So that's the last of the participant types that we're going to have a chat about. Now, metering equipment providers are a new participant actually under both the Act and also under the Code. There was a participant called the metering equipment owner who we have basically relabelled actually as the metering equipment provider, and we took obligations from retailers and put them onto metering equipment providers. Now, what a metering equipment provider is someone who is responsible for a metering installation. Every metering installation must have a metering equipment provider, or we also just call them actually MEPs. They're responsible for ensuring that electricity is actually measured, that goes through the point of connection. They're responsible that the metering installation actually complies with the requirements of the code, and that it's actually certified and maintained in compliance with the code. Now, our view is once a metering equipment provider is actually on a site, they should remain there as a long-term with a long-term relationship actually with the site. Retailers can switch in and out periodically, but the MEP, we imagine, would be a participant that would remain actually connected to a site. So, we went through a 5-year process of putting MEPs in place. We actually started the whole process way back in August 2008. For those of you who have got white hair, you probably actually remember us actually starting the process, and it took 5 years to actually develop the new Part 10 and actually put it in place. So, some definitions. We talk in the code about ATHs, and an ATH is an approved test house. Now, anyone who wants to touch a metering installation has to be an ATH. So they need authority approval. In order to be an ATH, they need to actually show by audit that they're competent in what they actually do, and they need to be able to actually understand and work with the market processes required in the code to test metering installations. So an ATH basically does a warrant of fitness. They do a snapshot at a particular time, and they say, at the time I viewed this metering installation, it is accurate, it is operational, it is good, and it should actually stay accurate for the period of time that I've certified the metering installation for. And the code tells them how long they can certify a metering installation for, the maximum, and they can certify it for any length of time, actually less than that. So an approved test house can go to a site, they can replace meters, they can certify metering installations, they can test equipment. If they are appropriately approved, they can also calibrate equipment as well. Metering data is another term that you will see, and I did throw a little picture in here somewhere, which was this, and I did this a while ago to try and explain to people what metering data meant. Metering data is another one of those terms that means a whole raft of different things, and we use the terms actually right through the code depending on what we're trying to collect. In the code, if we say metering data, we mean everything to do with the actual records of a metering installation and everything to do with the raw meter data, which is effectively the meter readings themselves, what you actually pull back from a meter. So in the code, where we say metering data, it means metering records and raw meter data. If we say raw meter data, it means the results of an interrogation. And when you work down through here, raw meter data, appropriately managed, can become volume information, appropriately managed becomes submission information, appropriately managed becomes reconciliation information, and appropriately managed eventually becomes clearing manager information. Effectively, what this process is doing is it's taking a huge lump of data here and narrowing it down as we actually go through the process. Now, we won't work through the definitions of all of these, but if we talked about metering data, it can basically mean anything that actually sits under here, including registry meter records. Registry meter records are what the MEP populates actually into the registry. So I just popped that in actually just for your information. So metering equipment owner, still exists actually within the Act. They're still a participant actually within the Act. However, they have no code obligations. Any code obligations that used to be on the metering equipment owner, like carrying out inspections and recertifications, are now actually on the MEP. In reality, many metering equipment owners became MEPs at the time the new Part 10 became effective. Metering equipment provider was what we were saying about, is the person that we blame for anything that goes wrong with metering now. Registry metering records is what actually gets populated into the registry by the MEP. So, metering installations. Each item in a metering installation, I've drawn one of Ian, not even one of Ian's metering installation. There's a metering installation here, and they comprise lots of different components. There might be some measuring transformers, there might be some wiring and some fuses, there might be a test block, there might even be a ripple relay or a load control device, and there may be a meter actually attached to it. Now, in the New Zealand context, provision of metering is actually competitive. There's only one other country in the world at the moment actually running competitive metering, and that's actually the UK, and it's sort of pseudo-competitive, pseudo-regulated. But in New Zealand, it's a deregulated market, and the retailer can decide who the metering equipment provider will actually be for an ICP. But sitting within a metering installation, each one of these lumps of equipment may actually have a different owner. And it doesn't matter. What we say to the MEP is we say, we don't care who owns the gear actually on a site, you should actually have contracts actually with them if you intend to use it, and if you intend to lease the use of that meter actually to traders. And we require the MEP to ensure that all the components are actually certified, and if they are, the ones that are certified have to go into the registry as registry metering records. So, there are some basic rules. There can only be one MEP for an ICP. So you can't have multiple MEPs, but there can be multiple metering equipment owners within an ICP. But we only want one person who has responsibility for the metering at an ICP. The trader at an ICP decides who will be the metering equipment provider, and it's entirely their choice who they actually use. A person becomes a metering equipment provider when they start acting as a metering equipment provider, which may be when they install equipment on a site, or when they populate the registry with registry metering records, and we call that actually assuming responsibility. Once an MEP is on an ICP, so once they've actually agreed that they're going to actually be an MEP, they don't lose the obligation. They remain there until either the ICP is decommissioned or another MEP takes over responsibility as being that particular MEP. So it's an enduring obligation. They can't walk away from their code requirements. However, if the process of notification that goes through the registry, and I think you did it just before, was that the retailer notifies the registry of the participant identifier of the MEP. That doesn't really mean a great deal. The registry says, that's interesting, I've got a notification here for AMS as the MEP, and it will send a notification out to AMS and say, hey guys, do you want to be the MEP for this ICP? AMS could do nothing, they don't breach the code. They could reply with a reject, absolutely fine, that's up to them. They could reply with an accept, absolutely fine, that's entirely up to them. If they reply with an accept, but they don't go to the site and replace metering equipment, or they don't update the registry with new metering records, they have no obligation, they have not breached the code. And the traders are expected to actually monitor the acceptance by an MEP of actually being the person responsible for an ICP. So, what are they responsible for? Well, they must ensure that ICPs are actually certified in accordance with the code. They must ensure that they're actually inspected in accordance with the code, because if an ICP is not inspected in accordance with the code, the certification automatically gets cancelled. They've got to make sure their systems are secure. So Schedule 10.6 of the code includes provisions around security, integrity and privacy of information and who may receive information from an MEP's system. They've got to ensure that information is provided to parties that the code actually regulates as having access. One of them's us. So we could actually go to an MEP and say, oh, that's an interesting looking metering installation, give us the information please. And they actually have to do it. Our investigators can do the same. So can our auditors. They can also do the same. However, an MEP otherwise can't release information to a person that the consumer is not authorised to receive that information. So what sets us a little bit apart from the rest of the world is we don't look at meters as just being a device hung in an installation. We look at it as the whole system itself. And when we don't talk about smart meters in New Zealand, we talk about advanced metering infrastructure or AMI, because we talk about a meter on someone's premise, we talk about the communications, we talk about the back office process in terms of AMI. In terms of a legacy meter, we just talk about the meter actually on someone's premise and the meter register that's actually on it. So we treat things in New Zealand regulatory-wise a little bit different to what they're actually treated overseas. The MEP's got to comply with registry processes, so Schedule 11.4 of the code sets out information they must populate into the registry. It sets out when they must do it, and it sets out what form that information must actually take. I have the registry functional specification at the back that I'm going to give to Kate shortly, because I think she actually wanted a copy actually of it. And it sets everything out in there together with the conditions in which that information must be populated. And we expect them to compare their information. We expect them to actually check that what's in the registry matches what's actually within their back office systems, because the information they populate into the registry directly impacts what retailers invoice customers, what they provide into the electricity market for settlement, and what they provide to distributors for settlement of line charges. One of the lesser known obligations, it seems anyway, is that we also require MEPs, before they actually carry out a design of a metering installation, that they must go and chat to the distributor and say, we're going to put this metering installation in for this type of customer, what's your requirements? And this is the distributor's opportunity to talk to the MEP about getting added value services or about ensuring that the appropriate information is being recorded to allow line charging. They're also required to actually do the same for retailers as well. Now, it could be by global agreement. On larger sites, it'll be probably a one-on-one discussion. At the moment, we are reviewing MEP's first audits. Previously, metering equipment owners were never audited, but the new Part 10 says that MEPs must be audited anywhere between 3 months and 3 years. If they're really good, we'll allow them to be re-audited every 3 years. If they're really bad, they will need to be audited every 3 months. We're going through a lot of the MEP audits actually at this time. If anyone's interested, we are running an MEP forum on the 27th of August that anyone can actually come along and attend. One of the things we are discussing is the MEP audit cycle, the first cycle of audits that we actually have gone through. On the 28th of August, we're running a test house forum. Most of you, I think, would be absolutely bored to tears when we sit there and talk about measuring standards and uncertainty and how tight a terminal should be on a piece of wire and things like that. But if you really want to come, feel free to do so. They're required to populate register content codes that Jeff was talking to you about before, and a register content code describes exactly what a meter register does. And that's the little bit that actually links the metering installation into a retailer's tariff. It's that register content code that actually performs the price match itself. We also require them to actually keep a record of what the services access interface actually is. And we had to use big long terms actually within the code for something relatively simple. In plain English, services access interface really means where you get a meter read from. So you go to a legacy meter, your services access interface is the meter register because that's where you read the meter. You've got an AMI meter, you go to the MEP's back office and you get the meter reading from their back office process. That's the services access interface. We require metering records to be accurate. There has been some rather large data accuracy issues to do with metering records that you'd probably all be aware of, that the industry is still working through and will work through for some time. My view is it's a temporary pain. Once the registry is in sync and everyone's using the same information, it should remain actually in sync forever. If we have time later and we look at some stats, I'll actually show you what we can actually see in terms of issues with the registry which come out of metering records. MEPs must correct known errors as soon as practicable. Like we're saying, for all other participants, you know something's wrong, you've got to go away and fix it straight away. But the point that we would always make to people is that accuracy of registry metering records has always been required. It was in the previous Part 10 of the code. There it was Clause 10 of Code of Practice 10.3. It was in the electricity governance rules. It was in Part D of the governance rules. And before that, it was actually in Maria. Everyone who was a metering equipment owner was always required to keep accurate metering records. There's little excuse at this time for people not having accurate metering records. And we talked about dependencies. The only other thing I was going to mention about MEPs is they receive notifications as well. So if a trader changes something on the registry, an MEP will receive an automatic notification. If a distributor changes something, they'll receive an automatic notification. If a retailer switches or a switch is withdrawn, again, the MEP will actually receive an automatic notification actually as well. So that's sort of MEPs at a high level nutshell. Any questions? Great, thank you.